Welcome to another episode of Raising Them Up,
our Christian parenting Q&A podcast, and we're your hosts.
I'm Israel Wayne.
And I'm Brook Wayne.
Hi, welcome to another episode of Raising Them Up, the parenting Q&A podcast, where we tackle your parenting questions. And we would invite you to send your own questions so that we can discuss them on a future episode. There's a few ways you can do that. You can, first of all, email them to us at raisingthemup@generations.org. And then there's a toll-free number that you can call, leave a voicemail. It's 1-800-223-6567, 1-800-223-6567. Also, if you go to the website, which is generations.org/raising them up, you'll find places to subscribe to this podcast, which we would encourage you to do, but you'll also be able to submit a question there. So without any further ado, let's jump into the first question that we have for today. So okay. Brooke, what do we have?
So this one's tricky. My 16-year-old refuses to go to church. We love our church. We've been going for years. We did take a break and went to more of a concert church with lots of school friends, but there was no depth or substance to the sermons or community. It was a check the box of going to church sort of church, but we are back to our great community and he just refuses. I've taken away phone use for inappropriate use and his bike, taking freedoms he didn't have. So now I'm sitting at home with him missing church as well. Last week, I sat in the car praying and crying for him as he refused to go in. He did go Wednesday night, hugged people, and had a seemingly good experience, but today, back to square one. Do I just let him refuse, or do I make him?
So this is a question we actually had submitted to our Facebook parenting group. We have a discussion group on Facebook that's called Raising Them Up, Parenting for Christians, which is the name of my parenting book. And we have about 8,000 some families that are in this group. And this question was submitted there. And there were a few comments made by the mom that helped to clarify the situation a little bit, because I would answer this question differently based on the dynamics. And what's tough is when it's someone you don't know and it's an anonymous family and you don't know all the details, it's hard to give specific advice. And so I don't necessarily think there is a one-size-fits-all answer to the question of, should I make my 16-year-old go to church? I think there are a lot of different dynamics that come into play there. And so the first question that I asked was, are you married? Because in this description, there wasn't any mention of a husband. And so I said, if you're a single parent and you have a 16-year-old boy, the likelihood is that physically, you're probably not going to be able to make this 16-year-old boy do much of anything. And so the reality is that you're kind of in a bad situation there. And that is a dynamic that I've heard multiple times from many single-parent mothers, that they have this 16-year-old who just decides, I don't want to listen to mom anymore. And so it's a little bit broader question there, and maybe in the future we can do an episode where we talk specifically about some single parent dynamics.
Right.
But I would say in that situation regarding going to church, if you're a single parent, you should make your wishes known. You should express your viewpoint that you believe it's important for him, particularly if he is a professing Christian, to be part of a local church. I think I would encourage the elders of the church to meet with him and talk with him and have some conversation. But if he's saying, I'm not a Christian, I don't want to have anything to do with Christianity, then in most cases, there's just not going to be a lot that you can do, and nobody wants to be in that unenviable position of not having a solution. This is one of the problems I find, that people sometimes will write in with questions, or they'll go to a Facebook group and they want a solution to a problem that unfortunately sometimes there's really not a way to just snap your fingers and make this all fit and make it work. I did find out that in this particular situation, she is married. And so there's a dad, although in this description, it sounds like it's the mom who's doing all the heavy lifting of trying to make this young man go to church. And so I asked about the dad, and it turns out that the dad is kind of worn out. And there's a bigger picture with this young man. And this is important too, as far as how I would approach this situation, because I think there would be ways that I might approach it differently depending on the dynamic. Like, let's say that the only issue is that you have a well-behaved young person who is respectful, who is not causing problems in the home, and basically they're having a crisis of faith. And they're saying, I just don't believe this anymore. Intellectually, I just don't see it. And I think I'm being hypocritical to go to church when I just don't think I'm a Christian anymore. I probably would handle that situation very differently than a situation where you have a chronic, rebellious child. And it sounds like that's what this is, because in some dialogue, we got some more information. And so this young person actually is homeschooled, but was riding his bicycle to meet with friends that the parents didn't approve of, and there's some bad influences there. So that's why the bicycle has been taken away, and there's inappropriate cell phone use, and so they've had to put that away. And there's just a culture of disrespect that this young man shows to his mother and father, even refusing to do chores, refusing to take showers, not even won't brush his teeth, and I think some of it's just defiance, right? You're not going to tell me what to do. So I think that you have to address a situation a little differently there. Honestly, if it was the first scenario where it's a respectful young person who's not creating chaos in the home and is having some intellectual doubts about the Christian faith, I would respect that. And I would say, I'm not going to make you attend church, but I do want to continue to have conversations with you. I would really highly recommend that they get my workbook, Foundations in Faith, which is a 36-week, 180-lesson Bible doctrine curriculum. And this is for teenagers and helping them to understand the basics of the Christian faith and to be able to defend the Christian faith. And so this resource is going to be really helpful for someone who's struggling with doubts. And someone who's struggling with doubts, I think you address differently than someone who is in rebellion. And so this book, you can purchase through the generations.org web store. But this is a rebellious situation. And I think the key to this situation is dad. So as I responded to the mother in the group, I said, do I think you should make him go to church? No, I think his dad should. And I understand there's a point where physically you can't make a 16-year-old. They can literally be bigger than you and just say, you can't make me, I'm not going to move. I think in that situation, you really have to look at the big picture. And in most cases, and I think this case is one where you have younger children in the home as well, you actually have to start thinking about how can we protect the younger children from the influence of this older one. And that older one needs to start feeling the weight of responsibility, because they don't. Like right now, they're subsidized, they're being fed, they're being clothed, they have a roof over their head, they're not contributing in any way, and they've just decided that they're not going to follow any rules. And that needs to be something that's not being easily accommodated. And so I think in a situation like this, the dad is going to have authority that the mom does not have, in most cases, unless he's abdicated it. And in this case, it sounds like the dad, for whatever reason, has just kind of thrown his hands up and he's sort of tired, frustrated, given up. I don't know entirely, but it's a very serious situation. I still think it might be worth having a family meeting with the elders, seeing if, who knows if he respects them or not, but maybe they'd be able to talk to him and get through to him. But I would, if I were a dad in a worst case scenario where this is chronic, it's been going on for a long time and nothing's getting through to him, I would be informing him that it looks like this is not working out and this living arrangement is not going to work. And so he needs to be thinking about his future. If he feels like he's a man and he can provide for himself and take care of himself and all that, he needs to start moving in that direction. And, whether that means moving him to some kind of a boys' home for troubled youth, who are equipped to be able to do this, or, you start looking at brochures for the military in a couple of years. I don't know, but at some point he needs to be able to stand on his own and start paying his own way if he's going to make all of his own decisions. But staying at home, being belligerent is detrimental to the younger children. So you have to start thinking about how can you protect the sanctity of your home, the relationships that are still healthy, and he will do everything he can to destroy your marriage, to undermine your relationship with your younger children. I ideally would like to see the dad step in and be the dad.
Yes.
And really call this man to responsibility. And if he just refuses and he won't honor his dad and he won't abide by his dad, then he needs to start thinking about where he's going to go, and I know those are hard decisions at 16, that's a tough age. It's, at 18 years old, throw him out. I mean, make the man.
He wants to live on his own decisions,
yep,
right?
He wants to live on his own, under his own terms. He can pack his suitcases and get out. I know that sounds cruel and it sounds harsh, but it's really not about being heartless. It's that at this stage, you don't have a lot more that you can actually do to sway those young people. You can't change their heart, but you can protect the sanctity of your home. So in my book, Raising Them Up, Parenting for Christians, I have a chapter in here where I talk about influence versus control.
Right.
And how when your children are young, you need to parent with a paradigm of control, but then you transition to a paradigm of influence over time. The hard part is most parents try to be their buddy during the younger years. They don't really build control, and then they don't have authority. In the older years, the young people don't listen to them. They don't respect them. And so then they're trying to parent with control at the age of 16 and 18, and it just doesn't work well. So there's not easy answers to this, but I think that this book, Raising Them Up, will help a lot of parents to prevent that kind of a situation in particular. So again, this can be purchased at the generations.org web store.
So the next question we wanted to tackle is this. What are some good guidelines or rules of thumb for older kids helping with little ones? And this is an area I've given a lot of thought to because I grew up with just one brother. There were the two of us, very close in age, and I did not have younger siblings in the sense of lots of little siblings to help in the home. So I think I looked at envy at some larger families, the older daughters that I knew, and thought, wow, they're going to be so well equipped to know how to handle little children and more about like running a family, the home functioning and all that for a larger family. And it just felt to me a little bit like, even though my mom did her best. So I felt like I wanted to take those thoughts from these older sisters who had lived the life with growing up with a large family into account as I started looking ahead when we had just little ones. And one of the things that came to my attention when I would read Proverbs were verses like this from Proverbs 1:8. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching. And the emphasis I see through so many passages is for a father or mother calling for their son's attention, for his heart, giving that impartation of here is wisdom, here is knowledge, let me lead you and teach you. And the responsibility I see is for the parents to be the ones instructing and teaching and guiding their child. Or we take into Deuteronomy 6, for instance, where it's talking to the parents, when you rise up, when you go out, not like, oh, when you're busy about your stuff, have your older child do all this teaching and showcasing of how to live for God and let them be the responsible one. It's talking to the parents. One area that we have implemented in our home, and I would encourage families with older and younger children to consider, is having an older child teach a younger child something, a skill, or maybe piano, or working with them in some sort of craft, when it is beneficial for both the older child and the younger child. And in that way, I feel like it's something that would benefit, because I do see teaching as a very valuable aspect for somebody. If somebody is teaching something, they tend to retain that information better. They tend to really understand whatever their subject is. So for instance, with piano, say, if you have an older child who loves to play the piano, that's a skill of being able to teach the piano skills that will help them in their future. Will help them if they have their own students someday that they are actually charging for.
Yeah, I think one thing we have to be careful to guard against is there are families where the older children, particularly the oldest daughters, are tasked with the responsibility of raising a whole host of children that they didn't give birth to.
Right.
And that usually ends up leading to resentment. And so be mindful of that, particularly large families, that the mom can't just check out and be like, okay, you're going to do all of this. And so a 14, 15, 16-year-old is basically running the house, making the meals, doing the laundry, watching the children, changing the diapers. That ends up in resentment. That teenager did not ask to have those children. They didn't do that by choice. This is being imposed upon them. So there's a balance because we are a family. And a family is a culture and it's a community. And so for it to function properly, everyone has a part and everyone needs to contribute. And so we certainly want older children to be able to come alongside and help younger children in appropriate ways.
Right.
But we don't ever want to encourage parents to abdicate their role as parents. And I think there's a few ways in which this happens. One is delegating discipline to other children. That is something in our home that we don't do. We don't want our teenagers physically disciplining little children. And so they have to have some authority, right, if they're going to be in charge. And so there are things that they can do. They can insist on a timeout, or that the younger child goes to their room for 10 minutes until they get themselves together, or misses out on a privilege that they don't get to watch a family movie or something like that.
Right.
So there are ways in which even they don't get dessert, right? There are ways in which the teenagers can have some leverage. But we don't want a situation where physical discipline is being administered by a teenager to a younger child. I think that's really unwise. And so if you're a family that's been doing that, I encourage you to reconsider that. One thing that I think, and that I'd like to do more in our family, is with academics, having the older children check the tests of and answers, workbook answers of the younger children, right? Because you have an answer key, and you can go through and see, did they answer these correctly? So they're not even teaching.
It's not a one-to-one interaction, but it's just a tedious little thing. And,
it's time-consuming for the mom.
It is. And yet I know anything I've done like that, there's a brain speed that can be developed for the older children to check back and forth.
So it seems like it's a good skill for them to learn how to do. It's a way that they can help. It frees mom up to do some things that only mom can do.
Right.
And so I think that's something I would like to see our children do a little bit more. We have had some situations, Brooke alluded to, like piano lessons.
I think I found one area as well that's helpful is having our children develop skills and serve in the larger family unit by doing the home chores, in cooking or yard work. And those are things that can translate into skills that they use in their future. Obviously, we all feel like child rearing and knowing a little bit about teaching a child something are very useful, but in just keeping that in a smaller amount so that you're not landing so much responsibility on your young person. But the areas of, can they cook the meal? Can they clean up the home? Can they create beautiful things that you grace your table with, or serve another family by taking the meal that you said, I'll sign up for this meal to take to this new family. Well, that's maybe something the older child can do so that you as a mom or dad can invest in the character training, the teaching input that needs to happen with the little ones.
Yeah, so our 17-year-old daughter, for example, her first two jobs was she worked in a kitchen at a summer camp. And of course, she knew how to run a kitchen and feed a big family because she'd had experience in doing that. So she translated those to her first paying job. And then her second paying job was part-time, where she was hired by a group that has commercial apartments. And when they flip the rentals, they need it professionally cleaned. Well, she also knows how to clean an apartment or clean a house and does a really good job with that. And so she's been able to make money doing things that she learned to do at home. I mean, to me, that just sounds like I don't want to do that. But an opportunity to love and serve my family. Okay, well, I guess I should be doing that. Maybe it still looks like work, but I think sometimes just even the way we frame it can be helpful, because what it really is at the end of the day, it really is loving and serving your family,
right?
As opposed to looking at it as a chore. And so I think sometimes we can even change the mindset by changing the terminology.
Is it sometimes true that divorce is best for the children's sake? Are children resilient, and can they bounce back from it?
Well, I am going to say, first of all, it's never best for the children. However, it sometimes is absolutely necessary. And maybe that sounds like I'm equivocating there, but it is always tragic when a marriage comes to an end, especially when children are involved. And the idea of children being resilient is something that's promoted within our culture, I think largely by people who make money off of divorces, and also people who are divorced and are trying to salve their conscience about it and tell themselves that, well, this is really not all that hard on the children. It's best for them. It's in their best interest. And I will say that there are situations that are completely untenable. And you have infidelity that is chronic. You have situations where there is horrific abuse and there are people's lives at risk. And so in some ways, it's a necessary step that has to happen to protect human life, to be able to, break serious dysfunction that's especially physically harming children or harming the family. And yet, whenever it happens, anytime there's a divorce, it is the result of sin. Now, when I say that, everybody gets defensive, and I do understand that in certain situations, it can be a one-sided dynamic. There really can be a victim and there can be a perpetrator. And so I'm not saying that the victim is guilty. Most divorces, I think there's a little give and take. There's problems on both sides in most marital divorces. There are some that I think are completely one-sided. You may have a very godly spouse who is cheated on, and there's or is abused in terrible ways, and it's one-sided. But it still is somebody's sin, right? Anytime there's a breakdown of a marriage, it is the result of sin, and sin has consequences. And those consequences don't go away simply because we wish them to or we want them to. And I don't want to impose my experience, because I know everybody filters and experiences things like divorce differently. But my parents divorced when I was 6 years old. My mother remarried. Her second marriage was with a very physically abusive man who was my stepfather. And we lived with him for 9 years before that ended in a divorce. And I will say that that marriage was so abusive and it was so harmful that when it ended, it was actually a relief to the family. And my mom became a single parent after that and never remarried. And it was actually at that point that we were able to kind of put our lives back together and sort of figure out which way was up, because it had just been sheer chaos before that. And so that the termination of that second marriage was one that was necessary, and in some ways, it had to be. But the devastation of both divorces impacted us in different ways. And I don't want to give too much information about my family because it involves other people. I don't want to tell their story. But I have sisters, and they all processed this in different ways. Each one processed it in a completely different way. But I would say that all six of us, we had 3 from the first marriage, 3 from the second marriage, all 6 of us have been severely damaged in pretty profound ways, even into our adult years. And there's not a day of my life that I do not intensely feel the ramifications of my parents' divorce. The second divorce was one that, was necessary. As I said, we had to get out from under that situation. But my children are negatively impacted because of decisions that my mom and dad made when I was 6. And, you can look back at that and say, well, who is to blame and who's at fault? You know what? The bottom line is it does negatively impact children. And so where do we go with that? 2 things. If you're in a situation where you're thinking about divorce and you're thinking this will be better for the children, in most cases, it's not. There are a few where there's just not really a choice in front of you. You have to dissolve the marriage. You have to. Again, chronic infidelity, and even some situations where you have somebody who's going to kill you.
Right.
There are times where you just have to have a break. But even in those situations, simply getting divorced doesn't necessarily solve all the problems.
Right.
And so many times people just say, "Oh, we'll get divorced," and yet there's a whole bundle that goes with that people don't think about. Like, for example, if you have an abusive spouse, now all of a sudden you're sharing custody, and that child is going to go with that abusive spouse and be with that abusive spouse unsupervised for weekends or weeks at a time. And that doesn't necessarily solve the problem. It doesn't necessarily make that person go away. And the person who has chronic infidelity, yes, you have to dissolve that marriage. There's no repentance there. But then what happens is the kids go over there and now they're in the home with dad who has his live-in girlfriend. And they're exposed to all kinds of things when they're with that other spouse during those visitation times. So, people oftentimes, I think, use excuses like, oh, children are resilient, they'll be fine, it's best for them, when in reality, they're trying to justify what they want to do. And so I would encourage parents to consider seriously Malachi 2, where God says, I hate divorce. And again, sometimes it's necessary, but it still causes devastation. And for your children who have been through divorce, I think you need to seriously consider that they may have experienced deeper trauma than you think. I would highly recommend getting them involved in some biblical counseling and helping them to be able, especially somebody who has experience with trauma, to help them to be able to recover from things that maybe they're not talking to you about, but that are there. Because oftentimes those things can be suppressed. They come out later in the adult years. It doesn't mean that they're not affecting the child simply because they're not talking about it. So I would say fight for your marriage. Pray, get help. If they're willing, go to marriage counseling, talk to the elders of your church, get some good marriage resources. We actually have an audio seminar on our familyrenewal.org web store, and it's about a 4.5-hour seminar. I think there's like 5 or 6 sessions on marriage that we would encourage you to listen to. You can download that from familyrenewal.org /store. Just type in marriage in the search engine. And so fight for your marriage. And when your children are unfortunately forced to go through a divorce, please take seriously the trauma that it causes them and do your best to try to help them get some therapy. So we want to thank you for listening to this podcast. We also want to encourage you to visit our website. FamilyRenewal.org is our ministry. And if you're interested in having us speak at a future event, you can visit my website, which is israelwayne.com. There's a tab there where you can invite Brooke to come and speak as well. Again, please tell your friends about this podcast, and we will look forward to having you join us for the next episode. God bless.